My name's Paul Grist. I'm based in England. I self-publish my own comic called Kane, which comes out from the Dancing Elephant Press company, which is me. Kane is essentially, it's a detective story. It's a crime story. And the trouble is when you tell people that something's going to be a crime story nowadays, they expect something that's going to be gritty and hard and brutal. And there's certain elements of Kane which are gritty and hard and brutal, but there are elements which are more light-hearted, which are more uplifting, because that's what I like about sort of stories. I want something that is essentially positive, that makes people feel perhaps a bit better about things than they did when they started reading it. The main character in Kane is Detective Kane, who is a policeman who works for the New Eden Police Department. And essentially, the story which I'm telling at the moment tells about how after a 6-month suspension due to Kane shooting his partner, Dennis Harvey, he returns to the police department, and all the kind of reactions that people have to him returning to work and him having to deal with the repercussions of what he's done. Now, the reasons why he's killed his partner are not immediately explained. We know what he's done. We're not entirely sure why he's done it. One of the things that Kane is doing, Kane the comic is doing, is trying to explore that reason. So there's quite a lot of stuff which is shown in flashback, showing people things that have happened before, and things that have happened before from different people's point of view. So you'll see an event several times, but one time it'll be from one person's point of view. The next time you see it, you'll see the same events, but slightly differently, because it's viewed from a different point of view, from somebody else's perspective, and the differences can explain why a person responds to Kane in a different way. And hopefully, the idea is that as the story progresses, as the reader sees all these different events, all these different perspectives on that kind of single event of the shooting of Dennis Harvey, then they get a greater idea of what's happened. The overall comic is an ongoing comic. I'm not going to be one of these people who commits themselves to saying this comic will last for 10 years or this comic will last for 300 issues. I'm doing a comic which is that the story which I'm working on is finite. I know where it's going to. I know the resolution. I don't know an awful lot that's going to happen before the resolution, but I certainly know where it's going to. But once that story is resolved, there are other stories which are going to be able to spin off from that. So whilst I'm not like spinning the story on, I certainly know that once the story which I'm telling is finished, there'll be plenty more stories left to be told. I'm not going to write myself out of a comic there. There are several things that kind of come into creation. I mean, one of the biggest influences would be a program like Hill Street Blues, which is a story, in many ways, that's the kind of effect that I'm going for, which is kind of like several different people. You know, it's not focused on one particular character, but there are lots of different stories going off in it. That's the kind of effect which I'm trying to create in Kane. It's very much similar to the kind of writing that you get in Ed McBain books, which are again, it's very much that kind of crime story, but it's dealing with several different characters within the 87th precinct. You don't just focus on one policeman, but they'll all be cropping up within one story, but they'll all have a greater or lesser importance to the story. I've only just started reading Elroy and Leonard. The comic may be seen as being cinematic, but what I'm trying to do is do things which can only be done in comics. I'm trying to use that comics vocabulary, which is not always something that can be translated easily to film or television. I think with Kane, you could probably take the story, and you could probably make a good crime film out of it. But I think it's stronger in a comic because of the way the story is told. And that's something which is sort of stronger because it's using the language of comics. I don't want to do something which is just essentially a storyboard for a film, a storyboard for a television series. What I'm trying to do is something which is, you know, a comic and unique in that way. I don't kind of, I mean, if somebody wants to make a film, please feel free to contact me. But that's not my main intention. I'm not trying to, but there are some people who do comics, and you almost get the impression that what they're doing is that they would like to be film writers, they would like to be screenwriters, they would like to be working in films, and so they make comics in the same way that they make films. And whilst there's nothing wrong with that, I think to a certain extent they're kind of, they're losing a lot of the strength of comics because they're not exploring the kind of the strength, the dynamics that you can have in comics, which make comics a different medium to television or film. They're not like a junior version or a cheaper version. They're a different medium, and I don't think people always take advantage of that fact. The differences which you can get are with the pacing of something. So if you're telling a story where you can have somebody walking around a scene, you can have somebody repeating a scene, you can repeat a scene with similar layouts. You can use layouts to reflect another story. You can use layouts from one side of a story, and you can use them again in a different part of the story to kind of emphasize the differences in a scene or something. It's very hard to kind of name specific instances without the comics here to actually say. For instance, when I'm telling the story in flashback, I'm using a very specific scene where I'm a very specific layout, which uses a black strip down and with panels across. Now, some people have said, I don't understand when the flashbacks are happening, and I find that quite surprising because I'm using exactly the same format every time the flashback occurs. And to me, that's obvious, but it's people not really kind of seeing necessarily what's there laid out on the page. They're looking just at the pictures rather than looking at the page as a whole unit. And so by doing that, you can kind of build up a kind of whole range of different keys which can kind of show people what's happening at an unconscious level, at a level where they're not thinking about it. So you don't have something where like you get clouds floating across, or like the misty kind of panels to show that something's happening in flashback, but you get something where sort of the first time people come across it, it might confuse them, they might not understand what's happening, but then the next time they understand it and it doesn't confuse them, and you're instantly there and you can cope with it. I drew a Grand Little Tales series, and I wrote for the Daily Bugle series for Marvel Comics. I wrote the Daily Bugle for Marvel Comics, which is kind of an interesting experiment. I've never actually written something for somebody else before. I've drawn projects for other people which I haven't written. For instance, I drew a Grand Little Tales series for Dark Horse a couple of years ago, but this is the first time that I've actually written something. And that was kind of an interesting thing to do, and I enjoyed doing it. It's an interesting challenge, and in some ways it can be quite a frustrating challenge, because as a writer, because I'm so used to writing for myself, I tend to see very clearly exactly what I want to do. So I don't worry too much about having to communicate it to somebody else, because I'm pretty much in touch with me as an artist, as a writer, so I don't have any problems with that. But when you're writing for somebody else, you sort of have to realise that for an artist, you have to give them certain freedoms, and one of the freedoms that you have to give them is the freedom to be able to do something differently from perhaps how you would visualize it. Because I know as an artist, I wouldn't want to draw something where somebody laid out everything in detail, and you're just essentially sort of the writer's more talented drawing hand. I like to give people the freedom to be able to do something a little bit more creative than that. By the same token, it means that when you come back, because the way Marvel comics work is that you do a plot and then script the story once the pencils have been drawn. And sometimes you get the pencils coming back looking quite drastically different from how you'd imagined it when you were writing them out. But that's interesting, the things you can play off. And there are things which, sometimes if you're lucky, there are things which you wouldn't have thought of. And you think, well, yes, that's clever, that's good. And you're able to build on that. I mean, that's when a kind of a partnership works well. I've written a Superman script for the this year's Superman annual, one of this year's Superman annual, which was interesting. I'll put it no more strongly than that. Interesting, but again, that was something which was kind of fun to do, and I was very excited about the idea of doing it, simply because sort of having read Superman since I was a child. But I must admit I was rather disappointed when sort of I found out that it wasn't going to be the real Superman as far as I'm concerned, but instead this kind of blue, zappy electricity Superman. So that was a bit disappointing. But still, it was Superman of a fashion, so that was fun. The San Diego convention has been quite good. This is the first time that I've come over and done the trade show as well. And that's kind of important, especially for somebody who's self-publishing, and somebody who's self-publishing from Britain, as I am, because it's important not just to let the readers know what you're doing, but to let the retailers know what you're doing, because it's the retailers who are the first person that you have to sell a comic to. There's no good sort of producing a great comic, but then the retailers don't bother ordering it. So you have to show them that what you're doing is worthwhile, and that's the kind of whole benefit of a trade show. So that was one of the main reasons for coming over, because obviously if you're going to do any convention in America, I think that San Diego is probably the one to do, because it's the one that everybody will go to.